All right, so here's Kaj's model, and I'm gonna start this DVD out by doing the ultimate Zen experience, UVing. Just gonna talk about what I'm gonna be doing in the DVD while you watch me UV. It's a pretty monotonous, but I'm gonna point out the different key things I'm doing, but most of this is quite basic. The first thing I'm going to do is break out all the non or the miscellaneous stuff. So I'm just doing ears and nostrils and stuff like that. But while I'm doing that, I'm just going to talk about a little bit about what we're going to do. The first section of the DVD is going to be the head. So we're going to go ahead and UV it. We're going to do some texture maps for it. We're going to do some quick shader setup, and then we're going to do a little bit of visual development, which is using Shake to take all the elements that we make, the asset elements, and really see where they can go or where they are going, and how that translates into the next phase of production. So for now, the UVing process is going to go fairly quick. I don't do a lot of fanciness for this portion of the UVing. Most everything that you'll see here is the most very basic UVing tools that Maya has to offer. Save one plugin that I'm using, but we'll go over that shortly. But the key to UVing is just patience, really, and just thinking about your texture. I really think that UVing is a texture person's job and not a modeler's, because you constantly are thinking about the surface, like, well, how much detail is going to be here in my map, or I'm planning to have some nice wrinkles in this area, so I want my map to be perfect right here. Or I'm not going to have any information here, so I don't even have to worry about it here. So it's really a planning stage for initial texture work, and I think it's something that every texture artist should be able to do and do well, because you don't want to rely on the modeler to guess where your textures are going to go from there. So I just right there I just use a quick mirror selection script. You can find a plethora of those out on the interweb. But I'm just UVing the miscellaneous stuff mostly to just get it out of the way and to give it some texture or some parametric space so that I can easily grab it, delete it, whatever. I'm not really concerned about the actual unwrap on these things. The mouth bag obviously isn't a concern, but I want to be able to have it. I'll have unique space. I don't want any overlapping or enclosed objects or anything like that in the UV editor. I want everything to be straightforward. I don't want anything to be deceiving, and it's important because later in production, when you're trying to make sense of something and you only have 2 hours to do it, and you don't want to spend 40 minutes of that hour trying to figure out what the hell you did or where stuff is. So if it's all sort of separated and laid out very simple, then you can go in and easily just manipulate those. So I'm just cutting some UVs and separating some shells here. The head is probably one of the easiest things to UV, and so it's nothing you should be scared of. It's quite simple, and should go quick for most any production. A head UV should go quite quick. Bodies are more intricate. The costume for this project was much more intricate than any of this work, so it seems tedious, but it goes quick, and you won't have to do it again. So I'm just being fairly anal about this. I usually am about my UVs. You don't have to be. It's just a preference. I like my UVs to be clean, even if they're not seen very much. It's just because things like overlapping UVs are bad when it comes to generating displacement maps and rendering and stuff like that. So I like to make sure that every little piece of my UVs are clean and are not going to cause any problems later down the road. At this point in production, you're mostly looking out for most of it's preemptive, so you're not really worried about it being totally amazing, but you're worried about it being clean and you don't want to ignore anything at this point. You want to be thinking about all the aspects of the mesh, the UV, the texture, and not just. I mean, you don't want to just throw an unwrap on the whole head and then start texturing, and then later down the road, some problem happens and you got to re-UV it and retexture it. Better to just think about every possible problem, and at this point, with the texturing, and make sure the UV accommodates that. So I'm just doing some more miscellaneous stuff here, which is inside of the eyes, which isn't really going to have any texture at all. It's just there to have the mesh wrap around the eyelid properly, and but it's key to have this UV because if there's a displacement along the edge of the eye, you want to have any sort of displacement texture that's generated from the mesh. You want it to have some UV space so that it properly displaces around the eyelid, because that can be a sensitive area with displacement, and if there's a seam or a weird stretch there or overlapping UVs, it's just going to blow up and cause a whole lot of problems. One issue with UVing too is in production is the fact that when you're UVing these things, there's usually somebody, at least in this case, and most of the cases in my experiences, somebody is also working on the rig at the same time and possibly even updating the actual mesh. So there's multiple people working on it in parallel in a lot of productions. You'll see this. So be prepared to have to re-UV stuff sometimes, or have some idea of what's being changed, so that you don't spend a lot of time in one section in case you need to redo it. I'm going to show a technique for copying UVs over without changing the point count. The point count is the key in UVs and rigs, because weighting is based on vertex count. So and so is UVs. So if you change a vertex count, the weighting will have to be redone as well as the UVs. So any changes in the mesh at all will cause a whole bunch of problems in every aspect. So my main technique here is just to do a cylindrical, as you saw, and go ahead and relax the areas that I think need to be relaxed. I use a world space setting on my relax, and that just basically all that does is it takes the 3D space, it takes the distance that the vertexes are between each other, and then it tries to approximate that in parametric space. Tries to separate them so that they're the equal amount apart as they are in 3D. So it works quite good. You can also use unfold feature in Maya that it can work, but it has unreliable results sometimes. And I like to just hand UV stuff most of the time. I have full control over what it's supposed to do. If you don't have much time, definitely explore the unfold option. But you can get pretty far with just the relaxing and the basic projection modes. So this thing's almost all UV'd already. It's mostly just cleanup and mirroring at this point that needs to happen. So I'm just going to take a look at the different areas that are usually an issue. Most of them are looking pretty good. The sides of the nose and the front of the nose are hard to get to work properly, but the trick is to get an equal amount of stretch, like come 50-50, like to make a compromise, equal amount of stretching in each side. So don't make a part of it look great and then one part of it look really horrible. Try to bring both into like a sort of an okay range, because that's going to give you a most amount of pixel information for your texture, and you can always adjust for some of stretching in your 3D Paint programs. So I'm just changing my borders manually here. I just like to have control over that by hand, and then I just relax with my borders locked. And my borders aren't accurate because I'm doing it by eye, so when I relax you'll see some overlapping, but I just continually adjust based on where the points travel to. And again, the overlapping UV is the main issue here. I'm not too worried about stretching or any sort of texture information in these areas. Mostly just worried about having something clean. And if you want, these can look ugly as long as they're not overlapping too, depending on how much time you have. And I'm just going to do the same with the eye. And this stuff is fairly important because there tends to be a lot of sculpting happening on humans around the eyes, little folds of skin and the eyelids and those kinds of things. So if you have any overlapping UVs, it spells disaster. Alright, so I've deleted earlier I deleted the UVs to one side because I'm not too concerned about those. Like I said, I'm going to mirror them over. And all these tweaks I'm doing on the face will just be mirrored over as well. These ones I just UV'd for the sake of selection if I needed to select them, but I don't really care about them, so I'm just deleting the other side. And this little nostril piece is clearly unimportant, but I still want it to be clean. So for the rest of this DVD, I'm not going to have a whole lot of UVing. We'll cover the UVing in a little bit on some of the costume pieces, and those are much more complex than the head, and we'll do some different techniques, maybe some unfolds and things, but for the most part, the UVing is pretty straightforward for this sort of thing. But it's equally important as everything else. So we're gonna tweak the ear a little bit. The ears could be a pain, but mostly what we're concerned about, same as like I was saying with the nose, is it may look a little crappy overall, but if you're stretching and overlapping and stuff is sort of equally acceptable, then that's the goal. Because, like I said, we want the most amount of pixel information for the UV and just an acceptable amount of stretching. We don't want just the face of the ear to look amazing and then the back of the ear to be completely stretched. It's a hard shape to do, but you just got to compromise certain areas and let certain areas go and not worry about them. The textural information on the ear is going to be minimal as far as value variation. So when you have a lot of value variation, the stretching is more apparent, obviously, because you have a lot of streaking and whatnot. But if there's very little value information, you're not going to even see that. So unless the ear has a freckle or two, you're not going to see stretching unless it's extremely drastic. Mostly it's just going to be a very subtle skin texture with a little bit of variance in it. But a subsurface is usually a key element in the ear, and that also overrides a lot of the information in the color map, and as well as the bump map and all that. So the ear canal is merely just for having a clean mesh and having polys terminate properly and not having just a hole. So, but this definitely needs to have some sort of UV space. So we'll just break it out and give it some UV space. And it's going to be inside the head, so it's not an issue. So I'm just going to move over to that other piece as soon as this is smoothed and get this to be non-overlapping. And this one's pretty messy because it's a strange tubular shape, but it doesn't matter what it looks like. Really, it can be completely distorted. I change my relax settings constantly. The relax will do the iterations function of your relax UV relax will basically the strength of how much it moves points around. So, but it's an additive effect. So I like to keep it low and then just keep stepping it. So I'll hit. You might see the relax happen multiple times, and that's just because I'm hitting relax over and over and over in small iterations instead of doing like a one in like a large iteration. That way I can slowly move it out and then stop when I think it's enough, instead of relaxing everything way too much and then having to undo and then reset the feature. And it's just a good way to slowly modify your UVs. So the next important phase of UVing after you've got everything unwrapped is placement. Placement is a huge thing in production, and sometimes people will not pay attention to it. The key is to use as much of the UV space as possible for your UVs without compromising your unwrap. So you don't want to stretch it to be all skewed just to fill it out, but you want your UVs to take up as much as possible in their current state. So obviously the top part of my UV unwrap, the head, can only take up that much space because I want a good amount of information all around the head. So the back of the head is going to have an equal amount of information as the side and the front. So I could easily go a different route depending on how close up this was designed for. If you're working on a project that was really close up, you would do just the middle of the face, and then everything else would have much less UV space. The plugin that you see on screen right now is the Mirror UVs that I was mentioning. This plugin basically will mirror your UVs on the same mesh, so that you don't have to delete half the mesh and then mirror it and then restitch and all that, because at this point it's not possible because it's being rigged. So what it's doing is it's mirroring the UVs and tossing them. I put an offset on there, so it's tossing them over to the other portion, or slightly to the side. This plugin isn't perfect yet. It creates some artifacting, as you can see, but the time it takes to clean this up is trivial compared to the amount of work and headache that multiple people would have to go through to change the mesh point count. So you can get this plugin off of the internet easily, off any of the major resource sites, and it's called Mirror UVs. If you have the luxury of changing point count at this stage, you can easily just delete half the mesh and mirror it, and then the UVs will come along with it. But this is just a little production trick that I wanted to show, because there's oftentimes where you would run into that. But if you're in a very linear pipeline, and you can change the mesh as you see fit, definitely just mirror the points over and call it a day. So I'm just cleaning up some of these points on the top of the head. I'm not too concerned about them at this point. Just getting them stitched and inside the UV grid. So this is the last edit for the UVs, and we're going to head straight into doing the textures and the shaders for the head.